Hey everyone, and welcome to the season premiere of We Need to Talk. We took a few weeks off to properly get rid of the dumpster fire that was 2020, and now we are back heading into our fourth season, and I truly could not think of a better person to have on the first episode back. Joining me today is someone whose work I admire, whose voice I always appreciate hearing, whether it's about complex social issues, the latest young adult television show, or her deep love for Carly Rae Jepsen. Host and songwriter Grace Semler Baldridge. Grace, thanks for joining me.
Wow, that is by far my favorite intro I've ever had. Oh my gosh.
I had to throw those in. It's so funny because I love when you and your wife are talking about like young adult television or movies. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I was alone. So I was so glad I met you and like started following you and everything because I truly thought I was the only person that had an obsession with young adult stuff. So thank you.
No, it's like, we're so sad because we just finished The Wilds. I don't know if you saw.
Okay, so finish it. I actually partnered with Amazon to promote it and I got to see the first two episodes. You're like blown away right now. And I saw the first two episodes.
Person I know. Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
But it's so good. I haven't finished it because I have a baby, obviously, and you've seen her. She's all over the place. But it's fantastic. I really, really love it. Thank you.
Oh, no. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's so much that I want to I want to intro you. Like everything I love about you. But no, I love young adult stuff. And Lizzie and I have been so sad. Whenever we finish a show, that's the problem with binging in quarantine because you plow through shows so fast.
Yeah.
And now here I am just left to my own devices with my thoughts.
You watched Pretty Little Liars, didn't you?
Oh,
okay.
yes.
Okay, good. I figured, I didn't want to assume, but I figured. Have you started Tiny Pretty Things yet?
No, but it keeps being advertised to me. Is it good?
Girl, you need to watch it.
Wait, okay, so it's about ballet dancers, but there's something sinister
afoot? It's like Pretty Little Liars, but in a ballet school. It's crazy.
Lizzie! We have plans tonight!
It's fantastic. Oh my gosh. I can't. I love that I just gave you something to talk about.
I'm not kidding you that we will watch it tonight because we just were complaining last night. We just watched YouTube videos, which is also fine, but we haven't found like another show to
this
hook
is your
us
show
because we need, and I say this with love, trash.
I get it. I need 100%. 100%.
Yeah, I don't need.
My husband doesn't get the obsession. Yeah, my husband doesn't get my obsession with wanting to watch trash, but I'm like, you need to release, you need to just watch something. So
yeah, anything that's close to being nominated for an Emmy is, for me right now, too sophisticated. Right now. I might want it eventually, but right now I want something that's like for a 16-year-old. I want that.
I love it. Yeah, it's the best. But now we're gonna get into some serious stuff. But I love that we're connected on the young adult stuff because I definitely have felt alone. But let's talking a little bit about you. I mean, there's so much that you do that I love, and you're the host of a docu-series on Refinery 29 called State of Grace. And I love that how it explores basically kind of social justice and human rights through the eyes of being a person of faith. And before we get into some of the topics that you cover on that show, I want to talk to you just about your personal journey and your story. You were born here, correct? But you were raised internationally?
Yeah, so I was born in South Carolina, and my dad was a Navy chaplain, and then he also was like a associate priest, or like an up-and-coming priest. Mm-hmm. And so we moved for a while until I was like 6 or 7 to Delaware, and then from Delaware we moved to Belgium.
Gotcha.
Where I spent this is no Hilaria Baldwin, I literally grew up in Belgium fully until I moved here. When I moved to the US when I was 18 for university.
I love it.
My parents moved to the US when I was 9. They moved back they live in Kentucky now. We have we're a nomadic family. We have no other family in Kentucky, but my parents live there. So if I go back to see them, then that's where I would go. But I wouldn't say I'm from Kentucky. I wouldn't say I'm from South Carolina. I wouldn't even really say I'm from Belgium anymore. I don't know where I'm from. I guess I would just say
you're all over. I love it.
Yeah, I'm all over.
Yeah, it's totally fine. I love it. But you were raised a Christian, correct?
Yeah, my dad is an Episcopal priest. Yeah, so I was a preacher's kid, grew up in the church. But my parents were also very open about things. So I was always allowed to question faith I was not raised in a particularly strict household. I'm not really sure why that is. My parents are a little bit older. Maybe that's why, I don't know. But they were just very cool about, if I didn't want to go to church, if I didn't want to wear like church clothing, quote unquote church clothing. I remember early on, I was little. My dad was like, well, God doesn't care what you wear to church. Just come if you want to go. And I would go in like basketball shorts and stuff. So I was raised in a very Christian, like undeniably Christian. We're having like vestry meetings, like parishioners are coming through, we're doing all that stuff, but it was a very open household also. And there were also queer people in our church at the time.
I love that.
I didn't even understand that conflict yet. I had to move to the US to understand that.
Right. So that's part of the journey that I want to talk to you about, because I mean, I love hearing that you were pretty much raised in a very open and it seems like accepting family. So what was your journey like, kind of falling into the identity of what was, you know, what we know now is like being a queer Christian? What was that like for you, especially when you came back into the States?
Yeah. So once I started coming out to myself, because first you come out to yourself before you come out to other people. Right. So when I was going through the process as a teenager of coming out to myself, what did that mean? YouTube was recent and it's just started coming out. So I would type in like gay Christian into YouTube to see what would come up. And the first videos that would come up were Jackie Hill Perry videos. So they were anti-gay videos.
Yeah.
And it's all very full circle because eventually I would go on to meet Jackie Hill Perry, and I do have a fondness for her as well. But those first videos that I found were conflicting. And that was very confusing to me because I wasn't ready to come out to my family, but I did know that there were gay people in our church.
Right.
So I was like, are we not talking about the problem? Like, what is happening? And then when I moved to the US, it was, I was like 18, 19 is when I really started to come out more and more. Like I had come out to a few friends privately, but it was really when I was away from the nest, as is the case for a lot of people, that I came into my own identity and really started coming out. And then immediately I almost like the first year of being out, people would be like, well, are you still a Christian? And I didn't even understand why that question was relevant. And so then I started having to do my own research, and I hit a few walls. I was really concerned and confused about how my dad's church was teaching this one thing and how we were having queer people openly serve in our church. And then this other church that seemed also legitimate was saying this totally opposite thing. And it was really confusing. So I kind of chose not to engage with it until my best friend, very much a family member to me at that time, rejected me after I asked her to be a bridesmaid in my wedding. It was really only when I received that rejection. And again, I'm so privileged to have been protected from any rejection from a family member until that point.
Right.
That when she rejected me, and it was her birthday yesterday, and like we haven't talked. Like it's brutal what this does to people and how this tears apart relationships. It was only then that I was like, I think I need to go to the source and figure it out. And through that is how State of Grace got started.
Gotcha. I love it. I mean, I've watched quite a few of the episodes. I think there's 10 episodes out or 11.
Something like that.
And one of the ones that really struck me was when you kind of investigated the actual acceptance of queer people in megachurches, because having sung in a megachurch, and I mentioned this before we started recording the podcast, but I was a part of a megachurch in New York, and I left because of I'm trying to figure out the right way to word this, but the hidden theology, in regards to the LGBTQ community. And I just couldn't be a part of that. And I think it's a common thing, because I think with mega churches, they know how to get you there. They know how to have production value, which is a whole nother podcast we could talk about. But, they have the production value. They're brilliant with their marketing, and they really are very careful with their words in how they get people to be a part of their communities. So when you were doing that episode, like, what was your biggest takeaway that you realized when it comes to mega churches in terms of the LGBTQ community?
A big takeaway for me, and then I have a follow-up question for you because I'm so interested in your experience. A big takeaway is how legitimized these churches became, and how, quote unquote, cool Christianity became. And you can trace this back. Like Vanity Fair was running articles about these mega churches, how they rebranded, but the theology remained regressive. There was this public rebrand that's very effective. And part of how that became legitimized was through celebrity and high profile attendees. So when I hear your story, it's very moving for me, because a lot of times you'll hear people that will go there, that this theology doesn't affect them, because that's not that's not who they are. And so that you'll hear it a lot. Well, I'm going to change them from the inside. I don't think that's possible. I haven't seen it yet. So when I hear your story about you chose to leave, I wonder, did you wrestle with that decision? Like, maybe I could change from the inside. Maybe I could persuade them to adopt a more progressive theology. Like, when did you reach that point of like, no, I gotta leave. I can't stay here?
That's a great question. I remember sitting, because I was an assistant worship leader, and I remember sitting in the office with the main worship leader at the church. And I think there was a conversation that had happened about not allowing a person that was openly gay to serve, right? And I remember sitting in the office and saying, well, like, why can't he serve? And he was like, well, he's like, I do think God has, a plan for, him, whatever. And I was like, well, why isn't it to serve? Like, what's wrong? Well, he's like, well, he didn't want to say it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh.
And he was like, I remember very distinctly, he's like, God has a plan, for gay people. And I was like, well, why is being gay wrong? And he just gave me this look like, what? Like, why would you ask me that? And I never got an answer. To this day, I still have not gotten an answer. I was like, why is being gay wrong? And then he just kept saying, God, I believe God has a plan, for gay people. And you asking me that, it's like, should I have stayed? Maybe, but I felt kind of helpless. And we could go into a whole nother conversation of like me being a woman of color and trying to, argue with these white men. Like, it wasn't worth the energy at the time. So I just made the commitment that I wanted to try to find a community that didn't follow those practices. And that's just what I ended up doing.
But I honestly think when people ask me for advice, because sometimes I'll get DMs from people at prominent megachurches in Los Angeles that have maybe come upon an episode of State of Grace. They're like, what can I do? And I'm like, you got to leave. I don't know how else to tell you that, because you need to show that they can no longer ignore this conversation, this problem, that the gaslighting, all of that stuff, the non-answers, it's not going to fly anymore. And there's no excuse to be ignorant to that. There's too much information. And so I think that making a decision to leave is really powerful, because it kind of shows like, I'm going to practice what I preach. I believe that queer people are worthy and just as valuable and loved in the eyes of God. So I can't stay here. I can't stay somewhere that doesn't agree with that emphatically. During something that kind of like grinded my gears is that there were a lot of prominent churches during Black Lives Matter over the summer that loved basically being like, we're going to say Black Lives Matter. Like, wow. Whoa. And I think that is a fruitful step. Okay. But I'm like, let's talk about Black trans lives. Let's talk about the lives of Black trans women in this country. Why won't you say that on stage and receive your applause?
Right.
And so it's when we need to talk about like intersectionality within churches that now have seen that it's somehow profitable to talk about social justice in certain ways, but they're still picking and choosing the social justice that they've sort of workshopped is socially acceptable at this time. And it's like, I'm over that.
And the thing also with churches, it's easy to talk about anything. It's easy to post a black square. It's easy to just make a statement. But if there's no action behind it, it absolutely means nothing to me or to anybody, really. Because churches should be leading all of these movements, because I will stand by the statement that Jesus was the original social justice warrior. And it's crazy. It's crazy to me. And I'm going to be doing another episode on Christianity and politics with a very good pastor friend of mine. But it is
Can't wait for that one.
Yeah, I'm really excited
I'm so
about it.
excited.
But it's so crazy to me that, and confusing, I guess, for lack of a better word, but that, for example, a political party that is quite literally to me the antithesis of what Jesus stood for has tethered themselves to him, and that is part of their identity, and it makes no sense to me. And I'm actually curious, just you having done your series and even been in the South quite a bit, like, why do you think that is?
I think it's absolutely intentional. And we know that there were meetings specifically in the 1970s and 80s within the GOP party to find non-negotiable issues. And two of the issues that they circled in on were, their words, homosexuality. Sorry, that's like the funniest word to me, is like homosexuality and like the homosexual lifestyle.
Right.
It's like you kind of played yourself whenever you enter that into the lexicon of a conversation. Anyway, so that, and then abortion. So these were two issues that prior to this were not hot button issues within Christian communities, but they needed to harness that voting bloc, which we now understand to be the Bible Belt, which is like one of the most significant voting blocs for the Republican Party. And they played it incredibly well, and the messaging has been comprehensive. And it's something that I get frustrated with on the Democratic side, that they have never they've never really addressed that. Specifically, like, you know what I mean? Because there's so many people who vote blue wherever you are on the political spectrum. I wouldn't describe myself personally as a Democrat. I'm pretty like radical in my politics, but I vote blue, and I am a Christian, and my faith is very important to me, and my faith informs me to be pro-choice. And I have a statistical basis for that, because we have to look at the people who are seeking abortion. Most of those people are women of color who already have a child at home, who have basically been shut out by the system that we built this entire country on. So we have to look at who is seeking abortion care, and like why. And then also, I think if you want to talk Bible, let's talk about Bible, and let's talk about how Mary consented to the pregnancy before the angel left her. So if you want to take it to the Bible, let's take it to the fact that Mary was not carrying that baby in her until she said, "Let it be with me," and the angel departed. And so it's basically like, if you want to play that, then like we can play that, but let's also look at who needs this care in our country. That's how I vote.
Do you think it's possible to separate your personal beliefs with voting? Because for me, I am personally pro-life. If I were to get pregnant at any point in my life, I would never choose to have an abortion, but that is my own personal choice. But I wouldn't want anybody to take that choice away from me. And I vote pro-choice because it is none of my business what somebody else wants to do. So I really wish, they're not saying that I'm perfect, but I wish more people were able to separate that. So do you think that that is possible?
Well, I think just from you as an example alone, I think it's absolutely possible, because there you go. I think there are a lot of people who have been, I think, misguided in that if you are pro-life, that you need to therefore control the lives of other people who believe differently. And the weird thing about that is that so many conservatives believe in, small government, in like no government involvement, but yet here you are petitioning and picketing for a large, far-reaching decision from the government to come into the lives of strangers, people you don't know. I actually really, if someone, is pregnant and they have a really difficult decision up ahead of them, I think it's absolutely okay to counsel your spiritual advisor, your guide, to talk to a doctor, your healthcare provider, your friends, your families, to weigh your options and to come to a decision that is best for you. I'm not like, I think there is this misconception that because I am pro-choice, that I am therefore like pro-abortions, like, and I also want to destigmatize people who have had abortions. I think that this is an issue, especially for me, because of like me and my own gender. I like really never want to be pregnant. So I really have to just like, the dysphoria would be insane. Like I don't want it in my life. So I have to just give credence to people who are experts in this area, who do this work, and not be so self-righteous with whatever I believe, because it's just not, it is not my issue, so to speak. And I wish that on the right we would see that, of like, I am not an expert in reproductive health. I'm not. I don't know who this affects. I don't know how people go about this. I've never been inside a Planned Parenthood before, which I had not been until we filmed the episode of State of Grace. So just to sort of get off your high horse a little bit.
Yeah. How much do you think churches in general have kind of misinterpreted what their mandate is supposed to be? Because I've always viewed churches as supposed to be a community of loving people that just kind of help guide you and uplift you. And I mean, honestly, I feel like we as a people have made religion and beliefs way more complicated than it needs to be. You know, for me, my beliefs are very, very simple. Like, Jesus preached about love. And I think it honestly is that easy. God is love. Jesus is love. Let's just love one another. I personally do not want the responsibility of having to make decisions for other people, because I already have to deal with my own life. So just when it comes to the church as a whole, like, how much do you think they've just kind of missed the mark on what they're supposed to be doing?
I think we've missed the mark so completely in so many areas. When think about all the conversations we have about sexuality, orientation, gender, abortion, issues that you really have to like pick between, interpret and translate to find, to come to a concrete message that was preached in the Bible. All this stuff, did not exist, was not in the realm of what people were talking about. However, it's really clear when it talks about caring for the least among us, when we talk about the poor, when it talks about love, there's no stuttering from Jesus. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in there. And we have done a great job as Christians to insert that, and I think that was a huge reason why I've been able to build this foundation in faith, despite, coming to the US and being pretty rocked for a while because of how Christians were treating me as a queer person, and just all the gaslighting, and then eventually, the ultimate rejection for me. And it's because none of that was godly. None of it is Christ-like.
Right.
And once once I was able to sort of reconcile that, then I can really have this holistic, deconstructed faith that I love, and that is so comforting to me. But it is absent, I think. When we're talking about marriage. Okay, you want to talk about biblical marriage?
Yeah,
all right, let's go there. Let's go there, my friends.
Right. And that's what I think is so interesting, that people don't want to admit how antiquated the Bible is, like, and how full of contradictions the Bible is. And I think, being a Christian in general is actually a really complicated lifestyle, trying to navigate it. But I mean, just when it comes to specifically the LGBTQ community, when it comes to being a Christian and the Christian community, like, how and why, and I mean, and even when do you think we strayed away from the simple message that we are all made in God's image?
Oh, that is such a good question. I mean, I think something I've actually been poring over recently in my spare time in quarantine is going back over queer history, especially specifically in the United States. And so much of it is misreported. They're antiquated terms. It feels like our history was just sort of hidden from us for so long. But the term homosexual panic was introduced into the English language by a psychiatrist in 1920. So prior to that, of course, there was sort of referring to people who were queer as unnatural, which is interesting because my natural inclination is towards my wife. Like, that's not,
it's not a choice.
I would say, I would tell you, I dated a guy once, and boy, was that unnatural. Let me tell you, it was not a natural thing for either party. But so I think that when you have to look at like the history of Christianity, how it came over into this country, and how there were two-spirit there was the idea of being two-spirit in indigenous populations that were already here. And so we saw like gender variance as something very beautiful. And then the colonizers came over with this very puritanical understanding of Christianity. And it just sort of festered and eroded into something that has become, by the 20th century, very restrictive, regressive, and honestly, I think unnatural in many ways, because of the gender roles that were put upon men and women as informed by the Bible, and moreover by the teachers interpreting the Bible at that time. So I think it was like the 20th century is when things seem to have gotten really codified. It's when, sodomy laws entered in like the 1600s, 1700s, but they weren't really exercised and prosecuted very significantly until like the late 1900s, early 20th century. You start seeing masquerading laws. So that's like, I would be arrested for wearing men's clothing, which is stupid because it's so comfortable. But like, I would be very much.
But it is more expensive.
Sometimes that's true. These pants, I'm telling you. So I think that it was around like the 20th century when things started getting codified into law. That is a major turning point, because then if the legal system is saying that a queer person is outside of the law, then in 1946, we see the word homosexual enter the Christian Bible, an English translation of the Christian Bible. So you're seeing that entrenchment just sort of seep down. Not only are they outside of the law, but we are now also immoral, because that's what that translation was talking about, sexual immorality. Okay, so now we're immoral. And I think that just, then people sort of doubled down in the 1950s, the nuclear family. And it all just sort of spiraled from there until, Stonewall happened in 1969, but there were riots that predate that. But Stonewall was certainly this like boiling point of queer people being like, we will be counted, we deserve this seat at the table. And if you are not going to give it to us, then we're going to burn down this house.
Yeah. Right. So do you think that there is this struggle with, because I mean, I have a lot of friends that have walked away from the church, but still have a relationship with God. And if they didn't have their own personal relationship with God, they'd probably be atheists that are specifically identify with the queer community. But do you feel like this picture is kind of painted that you have to choose between either having faith and being authentic to who you are?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think for a time I probably would have felt that way, that I was not especially religious when I came to the US and when I was sort of coming out and exploring my sexuality, because it just always felt like it was in conflict and I didn't want to have the conversation. And then it was actually a big thing for coming out as gay was actually a lot easier than coming out as like a genderqueer non-conforming person. I kind of toyed with for many, like it took years to get my hair to where I like it. I know right now it's a mullet, but I like it.
I love it.
So because I was really struggling with like presenting, I didn't want to look too gay. I didn't want to scare people. I was nervous about the implications of presenting as genderqueer and all that stuff. But actually what happened when I started to I've always known that I was this way, like ever since I was a kid, like just in photos of me when I was really young. It's actually very incredible and beautiful how kids can recognize their nature when they're so little. I just always stole my brother's clothing. It was like the greatest joy ever when my mom would let me order from the men's Lands' End catalog, like for boys. And once I started presenting authentically was this turning point for me in my faith, because it suddenly, it's like everything aligned. It was like turning a dial and everything clicked into place for the first time. And it was the first time that I could pray without this nagging voice in the back of my head that I wasn't quite right, or that there was something wrong with me. It was like, once I really allowed myself to be this person that God created, then I was able to read my Bible with fresh eyes, and start that process of deconstructing and understanding, the history of colonization and Christianity and how that all sort of plays into where we are today, but that God is absolute love.
Yeah.
And I wasn't open to that type of a history lesson until I was able to read the Bible truthfully. And I can't read the Bible truthfully if I'm lying to the world.
Right.
So once I was starting to live as myself, then I was like, whoa, like, let's dive in. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So I think I understand the duality, and I have found a way to make this marriage, because it's the only way it's the only way I actually feel peace.
Yeah, yeah. How have you, because that was my next question, how have you managed to find a healthy intersection for both of your identities of being queer and being a Christian? Because I know it is a struggle for a lot of people, but you seem to have figured out this whole way to meld it into a really beautiful place for yourself. So for anybody that is listening and maybe struggling with this, maybe has walked away from the church because of that, how have you managed to just make this who you are and a part of your life?
Yeah, I think my biggest pieces of advice are research. Finding biblical scholars on queer theology was huge for me. It just cracked everything wide open. And I would recommend, as a starting point, the teachings of Matthew Vines. He has a book called God and the Gay Christian, and that was one of the first things I read. And that kind of delves into translations. So if you're gay or queer in any variety, you know the 6 verses I'm talking about. Like, they've been thrown at you. I'm aware of them. People sometimes post them to me on Instagram. Like,
that's
I've never
the other
heard
thing. Weaponizing the Bible pisses me off.
Oh my gosh!
But that's, again, another conversation. But continue.
So basically, I would say, starting looking at biblically sound queer theology. If you are anything like me, you will be convinced that it doesn't exist, because, again, the first videos that I looked up were Jackie Hillary's anti-gay testimony, and so I was like, oh, this is the only type of scholarship that exists. It's not true. Just do some digging. Matthew Vines is great. Kevin Garcia on Twitter is a friend of mine. There's so many people. I wish I could send over, now I'm blanking, but I wish there's a list. No. God is Gray on YouTube has some great videos if YouTube is your preferred medium. And so first, I think building that foundation of what does the Bible really say about being queer, a queer person. So understanding that. And then I think there's a lot of freedom in, you can deconstruct your faith, and it doesn't need to be rebuilt to anything. If it doesn't need to be, you don't need to find necessarily a structural church. I mean, obviously none of us are leaving our house anyway, but if that's not where you feel called, maybe you can just find yourself on in prayerful circles on Twitter, or you can be in group Zooms and whatnot. It doesn't necessarily need to look like what you understood faith to be before. You now have the freedom to build your own faith. If that is a Bible study that is you alone once a week, or if that is, Lizzie and I found this church, Middle Church, I don't know if you're familiar, but they had incredible online offerings of services over the pandemic. And we've just been tuning in as though it's like our church.
That's awesome.
We also have a church in Los Angeles, but it's nice to find other communities. And that's another thing is you can deconstruct, and you don't need to reconstruct in any type of way. Mm-hmm. You can change the name that you call God. I think we can agree that God exists beyond gender. And so if it's comforting for you to use she, her pronouns like God, our mother, then that's beautiful. And find your own personal relationship with God as not dictated by any sort of prior toxic doctrine, because what fruit has that bore us so far?
Right. I love your advice. I think that's great. And I love the healthy place that you're in. It's really, really refreshing to hear. And I love talking to you. Again, Grace and I could talk about many things. We were just chatting even before we started recording. But thank you so much for joining me. And please let my listeners know where they can find you, where they can watch State of Grace. You're also a musician. You have music. So plug anything you want so they can follow you and keep up with what you're doing.
Well, I am so happy to have joined you for this episode. I'm really honored that it's the new season premiere.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This space is huge. I hope that you understand that the space that you're creating is so important and needed. And I'm just grateful for people like you, because finding this podcast would have changed my life when I was growing up. And so it's significant. I know that it's just you and I, we're friends, we're talking and chatting, but it is significant. So I really appreciate you and inviting me on. Okay, so my name is Grace Baldridge. You can find me under @Grace Baldridge on Twitter, on Instagram. And I'm on TikTok as well. My wife and I have a TikTok.
I love it.
So there you can find us there too. And my artist name is my middle name, which is Semler. And I have an EP that I'm trying to finish up by tomorrow night. So hopefully that'll be out like at the end of January. I don't know, wish me luck.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And to the listeners, make sure you subscribe to We Need to Talk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. And we'll talk to you again next week. Bye. Make sure you follow We Need to Talk on Instagram and Facebook at We Need to Talk the podcast. And if you're interested in being a patron, make sure you go to patreon.com/Malynda Hale. Thanks again for listening. Bye.